We had the opportunity to hear from each other about the reasons that we're here, about what has brought us here. And we heard many of those reasons, and many of those reasons went unsaid. All of them are holding us here together now. So let's take this time to appreciate that, to appreciate the magnificent aspirations that allow us to join together in this community today. I can tell you that for my part, I have great confidence in each person here, great respect for each person here, great admiration for each person here. And as I said when we were telling everyone why we're here, great love for everyone here. Believe it or not, even if it doesn't seem that way, because we're in silence and we don't have the lights on and everybody's a little freaked out, believe it or not, this is a joyful occasion. I don't know of anything more joyful, actually. I don't know of any greater source of joy than human beings coming together in order to care for life on earth. And in fact, to do that by and to do that for awakening. What could be more magnificent than that? So it is a joyful occasion. It's just that, as I like to say, there's a certain dance that only grief allows us to dance. And this is a time for a certain amount of grieving as well. And I'd like to invite you into that. Invite you into a circumstance in which it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to rejoice. This is a community where it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to rejoice. We need both. We're going to need both for this journey. And in fact, it turns out they support and allow each other. We first and foremost, though, as I say, should give ourselves a chance to rejoice in the fact that we have come together for this at all. It is amazing. It is extraordinary. I grew up very concerned about the planet, about life on Earth. Have you heard about this? This is my cousin over here. Did you know that? Yes. When I was a kid, I was very worried about this. About the problem of extinction of species and the problem of global warming and the problem of nuclear war. These were issues I was very, very worried about. And I quickly, early on, when I was younger than anyone here, when I was, I suppose, less than half the age of anyone here, I gave up on the human race. I concluded that there isn't hope for this particular species. Our insanity, our selfishness is too deep to be resolved. And as some of you perhaps remember, this time Daniel didn't give as extensive of a presentation as last time. And one of the things he didn't do this time was give us more information and show us a video and such about the destruction of life. Due to time constraints and such, he graciously adapted his presentation. But last time he included that, and still now, after decades of tears, I still weep. We see the horror, and it's been happening for quite a while, and happening for, well, you could say decades, and you could say centuries, and you could say millennia. The destruction of life has been accelerating for a long time, and that continues to cause me terrible pain. And many of you have seen that pain stream down my face as tears. So a lot of what we're here to do is grieve. And so it's a reasonable question, why would I invite you into that? Why would I invite you in a place where we might grieve, crying, despairing regarding the destruction of life on earth? Because when we actually go through it, when we really face it, it can seem so overwhelming that it might seem cruel, that anyone would ask us to move through that. So I want to be clear about what's happening here, because this isn't at all cruel. This is the opposite of cruel. This is kindness embodied. What we're all doing here right now by being here together. This is kindness embodied. It is not cruelty in the slightest. So why is it that we would set the stage for grief? It's because grief is an aspect of love. We love this planet, we love life, and in order to love life, we will grieve its destruction. By grieving its destruction, we live out the love, the care for life. And we're willing in that. We demonstrate our willingness to become vulnerable. It's that vulnerability that opens our hearts, and it's the love that fills our hearts with joy. That's how it is. We can want it to be otherwise. We can want to close our hearts and not be swept up in this terror, and still have joy and still have open hearts and still dance the dance of our lives. But it doesn't work that way. So as I say, when I was 10, I gave up on people. I concluded that people can't be helped, that human beings are too messed up. And so, having given up on the entire human agenda, and therefore my personal future, because I'm not claiming that everyone else is the problem. That was not the claim. I am the number one human in my life. And I was aware that there's a lot of evidence right here in this one person that there's nothing that can be done for us. And so, having surrendered to that sadness, I'm not claiming any kind of deep wisdom here. I'm just saying this is what was happening when I was 10. I was 10. I'm talking about a 10-year-old right now. So I was 10, and I just gave up on people. And two things happened. One was I became very lonely, and the other was that I found that I could then, having given up on my future and the future of humanity, completely give my heart to the love of all of life. And about a year later, a couple years later, I was out in a field like this. This big open field surrounded by trees like this in the winter with snow. And for some reason I don't know, I just fell backwards into the snow. You can imagine, I'm a kid walking through a field, for no reason then just falls backward into the snow and was caught by the snow and looked up into the sky. You can see it. That very sky was the one I looked up into. And was filled with a love for all living things that I had never even dreamed of. I had never even wanted. I hadn't been able to conceive of the possibility of that intimacy of connection with all living things. That experience is what we're being invited into here. That level of love, that level of intimacy, that level of rejoicing, that level of connection. Or at least you could say that's the beginning. That's the start of what we're being invited into here. It was a wonderful day. It was very important in the unfolding of the rest of my life. If you can, a lot of good things have happened for me over the years, right? A lot of good things have happened. I learned how to ski. I love skiing. I fell in love. I got a job. I was good at it. Made money. I, with a number of other people, many of whom are here, in partnership with a whole community, created this, whatever this is. But when I go back, believe it or not, if if you gave me the choice between that experience and everything else I said, I would, if I had to choose, you know what I'm saying? If you had to choose, if you had to, is everyone following this or not? I'm getting nothing. Okay, so you're participating. Yes? So if you're totally still, you're participating as a totally still person giving me nothing. You're still participating. You can't stop, right? Isn't that the case? Yeah, so you are participating, even if the way you're participating is pretending that you're not participating. Even if you set yourself into the passive consumer mindset, you are still participating in that way. So, everyone understand what I'm saying when I say if you gave me the choice between that one and any of those, I would choose that one. Partially because of the extraordinary degree of happiness, but also because the good stuff that came with those other things was to a large extent caused by that one day, that experience. So that's what we're being invited into. It's something amazing. But let's not forget the first parts of the story. Anyone remember the other parts of the story? There's some, you can participate. What were some other things that I talked about in my story before that day lying in the snow? Despair. Yeah. Real despair was a major part of that for a long time. For a long time. Years. Anything else?
Giving up your future.
Yeah, giving up my future. Exactly. Even, it's amazing, by the age of 10, incredibly, we actually already have a pretty good sense of what we're going to do with our lives. I don't know how that happens, but it seems to be the case. It's not at all uncommon for us to ask kindergartners what they want to be when they grow up. And by that we mean that they're supposed to now say a profession. That's the significance of that question. And we listen and we think, oh, okay. And they have then said that out loud and made it part of their public persona. So yeah, it might seem strange, but even by the age of 10, I had a bit of a future. That I had a sense of what I and we all might do. And giving that up was terrible. That was not what I wanted to do. Anything else?
Self-hatred.
I had a lot of self-hatred, yes. Convinced that I could not be fixed. Exactly. That was impossible. Yes. Anything else? A lot of hopelessness, yes. That's what you might call despair. No idea of how to move forward. Again, for a long time. And years when you're 10 is a really long time. Anything else? Loneliness. Who said that? Yes, loneliness was huge. Huge. So I hope that as much as possible, because you're here in this group, you don't have to experience the loneliness. That part of it, I don't think is needed. That part doesn't seem to be an essential part of this equation. It doesn't seem that you have to be, maybe you personally have to go through a stage of loneliness. I'm not saying that no one does. But as far as I can tell in my own life and in working with other people, loneliness isn't a required part of this path. And I don't want other people to go through it, certainly not to the extent that I have. But in skillful ways, giving up our sense of our future. That seems to be an essential part of this. It just seems to be a part of this, to give up our clear conception of what our future is going to look like and look forward and not have any idea how we're going to do this. That seems to be very important. Despair, and therefore desperation. A sense of desperation that we really don't know what to do, but we're willing to do anything in order to be of benefit, of true benefit, to fulfill our vow, to live a life of love. And in a skillful way, because we use a term that refers to a very unskillful way of doing this, so I'll use the term that refers to the unskillful approach, and then move into the skillful approach. The unskillful way of approaching it is self-hatred. A deep sense that I am worthy of hate. That hatred of myself and destruction of myself will help to solve these problems. This is the unskillful way of looking at this. And the unskillful way is so compelling to us that oftentimes we feel afraid of the skillful way, because it's so hard to not fall into the unskillful way. And if we do, then it's very hard to get out. But the skillful way is a sense of remorse, a sense of shame. I don't know what word to use other than that, a sense that we have not lived well. We have not done what we were born to do. We have not fulfilled our calling. We have not lived according to our true nature. We have not moved through the events of our lives with integrity. And that's unacceptable. And it has to change, and it has to change now. And then we say how, and we don't know. We look into the future, we don't know what's going to happen. But we grieve. And so there are two kinds, you could say, of grieving that set the stage for the experience of such overwhelming love that it can intelligently direct our lives, even through despair and confusion, even if we enter deeply unskillful states such as self-hatred. The one grieving is a grieving of the consequences of our actions, the state of the world, the fact that there's such suffering, the fact that our society is based on the destruction of life. That we see that, we face that our society is based on the destruction of life. And that if there's any single theme that we see over the past tens of thousands of years of human society, it's the accelerating destruction of life on the planet. That's been extremely consistent over that time. And we grieve because there's such suffering, there's such horror in that. So we're invited into that grieving. And so you have a sense, sort of a somber group. Well, yeah, because there's going to be some grieving. The other grieving is grieving of our own minds, that we have not found a way out of this, that we ourselves are still participating in this, that we don't know what to do about it, that there is something, there's some infection, virus, I think Daniel said. There's some, quote, virus, it's just a metaphor. There's some virus in our minds that's causing us to be at best complicit, but in general participatory in this horror. We're somehow stuck in that. And we are here invited to grieve that. In my experience, the moment when we're willing to do that is the moment of change in our lives. And so know that you are being deeply respected. We are putting enormous faith in you. We have enormous confidence in you by asking you, having done it ourselves, to grieve your own mind. And therefore to relinquish it. And to know that, well, here we are. There isn't going, just so you know, in case this isn't clear, there is never going to be a perfect time to do that. There's never going to be the perfect time when everything is set up so that you can do that in a perfect way. It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. And a lot of times, one of the viruses in our minds is the sense of, well, eventually when circumstances are better, I will experience remorse. But there comes a day when we realize we're already too late. We're years too late, decades too late, centuries, millennia too late. It's too late. It has to be today. And so here we are. That is today. Today is that day for us to deeply, repent? To acknowledge our mistakes and then work through the obstacles that prevent us from overcoming that mind that really has not worked. So, now I'm going to do a little overview of what you're going to be offered over the next several days. So this is the more intellectual side of it, so you get a sense of it. We are presenting you with what you might call a modern version of an ancient spiritual apparatus, ancient spiritual formula called the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the basic teaching, the basic methodology of Buddhism. The Eightfold Path includes our entire lives. And Buddhism nowadays is typically not presented in this way. So know that even though I think in modern times we usually think of Buddhism as being basically about meditation, meditation is just one little part of Buddhism, and most Buddhists through time have not done any meditation. So it's not somehow fundamental to the tradition, but there are certain things which are fundamental to the tradition, which we have done our best to exclude from the tradition. So this is a little bit of a different formulation than many of us may be familiar with, but we have found that it's helpful. We aren't holding on to the Buddhist Eightfold Path with some kind of fundamentalist tenacity. We simply have found that it works the best. And while we are committed to it, we are even more committed to, if we find something better, then we'll do that. It's just we keep on failing to find something better despite our greatest efforts, which gives us more confidence that it's probably pretty good. It begins with right view. And right view, if we make it very short, means that you have the view, you have the perspective, you have the way of seeing, you hold the opinion, which you don't know. You don't know this yet. At the end of the Eightfold Path, you know All of this is what we call verifiable here and now. That is what that's the phrase the Buddha used to describe his teaching. He said, everything I teach is verifiable here and now. It's even better than what science offers, which is that things should be falsifiable. This has to be verifiable. So the Buddha's teaching is verifiable here and now. You yourself can confirm, or you have the ability to deny all of the Buddha's teachings. If you can disprove it, then great. Do it and let us know. But it's sort of like a scientific experiment. You have a hypothesis, and then you move through the experiment and find out if the data supports that. So the view that we take, which is a reasonable view, it's not unreasonable, it's a reasonable view, is that what you do matters. That's the view that we take. What you do has real consequences. Those consequences are, of course, physical. So I can move this. See? What I did made a difference. There. I did it. So there's real evidence here. Did you see? There's significant evidence that what I do makes a difference. You can say, but wait, really? And I'd say, well, yeah. So what you do matters in a physical sense, but right view includes that what you do matters in an ethical sense. That's an essential part of right view. What you do matters in terms of virtue, in terms of good and bad, and love and hate, and happiness and suffering. What you do has an impact on suffering and its resolution. What you do matters. You are able to do things, and that makes a difference. Physically and ethically. Ethically means virtue, in particular the resolution of suffering. And beyond that, everything you do matters. Everything you do matters. Everything you do with your body, every word you say, every thought you have has an impact. And you cannot avoid that impact. You can convince yourself, well, there really wasn't such a thing as cause and effect, but there still will be cause and effect occurring. So just so you know, as I said that, only one person in the room nodded, and so I would like to ask a question. How many people, raise your hand if you have children. And that was the person who nodded when I said that. Yes. Yes. When you have children, unless I'm mistaken, unless this isn't your experience, but I've spent time with kids. I don't have children, but I have spent time with kids. Sometimes you want to explain that there are consequences to your actions. Am I right? Have you ever wanted to explain that? Have you succeeded?
Sometimes.
What did you say? How did you explain it? Yeah.
Letting them fall again.
Okay, good. How did you explain it ever? Did you help them to see that? Or did they just have to go through it again and again?
Some things take more time.
Yeah.
Some things are quick. Hot stoves, they learn quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you explain it at all? Could you help them in any way to see that? Or did you just have to let them touch the hot stove until they knew that it would hurt?
I let them scrape their knees until they knew it hurt.
Yeah.
Not scar their hands, though.
Yeah. So sometimes you just had to stop them from doing something.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And sometimes you gave them an appropriate level of danger that would help them to learn without permanently damaging them.
Controlled fail.
Controlled failure. Yeah, great. Good. Well, I try to explain this, and apparently it's not easy. But also we have in this structure, we have a lot of controlled failures. And it is our job to give you the appropriate level of risk. It's our job to do our best. And if we make things really hard for you, and so you're emotionally freaking out and don't trust us or anything in the whole world, know that that's because we believe in you. We don't have to do that, obviously. It would be easier not to. But we love you, we care about you, and so we give you that level of challenge. Even though we know you might fail. I mean, it's true, you might, but we don't think you will. We think you can do it. We believe in you. And then even if you don't, even if you mess up, we still believe in you. We still love you. And if you pull it off, well, great. That's fantastic. Better for the rest of your life. But know that there will be some of this controlled failure. And all I can tell you is that what I learned in being in monasteries for a long time is pretty simple. I actually didn't go to the monasteries in order to correct the monasteries. Once you get to the monastery, it suddenly becomes extremely important to make everyone else different and better. But I didn't think, I really want to go to Japan and find a group of people I can improve. I want to go to Japan and figure out what's wrong with some group of people I'll find there, and then make them better. That just wasn't my aspiration. My aspiration was, I need to go there and work through my issues. I need to go there and purify my obstructions. And what I found was that once I was given the opportunity to actually purify my obstructions, especially when a great deal of confidence was put in me and I was freaking out, because that's what it means. When we really push you, it's because we're telling you we believe in you. As I say, it'd be easier not to. But we do, because we believe in you. And when they were really pushing my buttons, triggering me, pushing me beyond what I felt like I could handle, the immediate thing is, let me think up what's wrong with you. And I lost track of my aspiration, as Daniel said. My aspiration was not to come and fix them. It was to go on my own journey, purify my own mind. But also I lost track of my own experience, as Daniel said. Those are the two things you talked about, right? Keep track of your aspiration and your own direct experience. So I lost track of both of those. By keeping track of both of those and remembering, here is my aspiration and here is my experience, in that way I retain right view. Meaning, I am participating in this. What I am doing right now, in terms of how I'm thinking, in terms of how my attitude, my interpretations, along with my words, my actions, all of that is having consequences, and those consequences are unavoidable even if I can't explain them. Even if I can't figure out the causality still happens. It happens independent of my understanding, just like causality in the physical world. So a lot of people seem to have trouble figuring out the causality behind global warming. A lot of people have trouble with that, which is strange because when I was 8, I understood the causality behind global warming because it's that simple. An 8-year-old literally can understand it. And we had enough information back then to be clear on it. But we aren't clear because we are emotionally motivated not to understand it. So if we really don't want to understand how global warming works and its causality, then we won't, even if the information is there. And that brings us to the second part, which is right intention or right thought. Now you talk about right thought and it sounds heady, but it really isn't heady because it refers to having to no longer having thoughts of hatred and cruelty and selfishness, and instead having a generous mind of relinquishment, a mind of compassion and friendliness and care. That is right, you could say thought, or as we like to say, right ought. That's Hoji's term, if I'm not mistaken. So there's right is, which is this is the way you should think the world is. And how is the world? The world is like this. What you do matters, and there are consequences that you can't avoid to what you do. Mostly ethical. And therefore, what is right ought? What should you envision for a good future? It is a life of compassion and generosity and friendliness. In terms of classical Buddhism, it's put in the negative because the negative is actually much more open and free than the positive. So if you tell people, don't do these things, it's much more open and free than saying, do these things. Do these things is narrow. Don't do these things is open and free. So usually it said, do not have a mind of this selfish desire for things. Don't have a mind of hatred and cruelty and ill will. And then you just leave it to the person to work out, then what should you do? But if you want to put in the positive, then you can say generosity and compassion. We in fact have a lot of emotional blockages. And when we shut down and aren't able to stay with our original aspiration and our direct experience, it's usually because some emotional blockage has become overwhelming to us. And so we'll be spending a lot of time over the next few days working out ways to deal with these emotional holdings. Is that a good term, Peter? What would we call it? Yes? Emotional blockages, hindrances, emotional obstacles. So there's often something in our bodies that is tight, and when we are asked to see things in a way that is not in accord with that, we will often do almost anything to squirm out of that situation. Almost anything. Shall I go that far? Okay. So what do I mean by almost anything? This is what I mean by almost anything. I was talking with Daniel about this. By almost anything, I mean this. Human beings would rather, as far as I can tell, the way we are now, in our current state, we would rather destroy life on earth than grieve the destruction of life on earth. Because if we grieve the destruction of life on earth, we wouldn't do it. I can tell you that right now. But we're doing it. So we are choosing to do that rather than grieve that. Because it's so painful. We don't want to experience that emotional pain, and so we're willing to squirm out of it any way we need to, whatever that means. Even if that means kill your entire family. Participate in the system that will kill your whole family. Okay, as long as I don't have to feel bad. We're like that. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on this right ought or right thought or right approach to life. Working through these fixations that cause us again and again to miss the point, to turn away at the last moment when we could have grieved our minds, our behaviors, these systems, and then open up to a new life. So that's very good. But something which oftentimes people don't know about Buddhism and about spirituality, actually, in general, is that it is deeply relational. What I've said so far is somehow, when you look at this modern spiritual marketplace, it's as if this side that ethics and virtue are the basis of the path, and that how you live, what you do matters. This, I think, has been intentionally divorced from our presentation of the topic. And instead of that, there's just meditation to fill in the gap. But that side of it is the basis. The realization that virtue, that an ethical realm, an ethical reality, is at the basis of our spiritual path. This we propose to you. We profess this here. We suggest that you should take on that view. You should look at things in that way. Because it's true. And it's good. So look at things in that way. But another thing that's been divorced is the realization that relationship, connection, is essential to this path. And that's the place where we get to try out all of this view-taking and thinking and intending and emotional cultivation and purification. It's in the relationships where we get to really find out what we're holding on to and how we respond and how other people respond to us. And so in that, we begin with right speech, with a knowledge of how to speak well. That means that we speak in ways that are beneficial and in ways that are honest. So we're authentic and we're also kind in our speech. Now, as you'll see as we go through this, because we're going to spend a lot of time on right speech as well, being kind doesn't necessarily mean being nice. You can say things to people that make them very uncomfortable that are very beneficial to them. On the other side, being honest and authentic doesn't necessarily mean being mean, which we often think it might. You don't have to be mean in order to be honest. You can be honest without being mean. You can be honest and be kind, but that kindness doesn't mean you're nice, and it doesn't mean that everybody's comfortable. A lot of learning right speech is learning how to communicate in the midst of discomfort, how to have an uncomfortable relationship that is a friendship. How can you have an uncomfortable friendship? This is a skill that we'll be practicing a lot over the next several days. Beyond that, we should behave in ways, we should physically act in ways that are good and true, that are helpful, beneficial. And we'll have a chance to do that a lot. A lot of the way we'll be practicing that here, interestingly, is through chores, is through the enacting of care, the embodiment of care for the community. That's just one of the things. There are many, but that's one that we will be emphasizing on a daily basis. And we learn how to mop the floor in a state of care and carefulness. If we grow that, so you'll note, we're not even close to meditation yet. Have you noticed? So people talk about Buddhism, it's all about meditation, but we're not halfway there. So things coalesce at a certain point, at an essential point, called right livelihood. Right livelihood means that we live in a way that doesn't destroy life, and we don't do things like produce poisons and things. But right livelihood means more than that. It means that we live in a beneficial way, that we find a way to actually make a living. To actually make a living in a way that is good for the world. This is, if you consider this to be a wheel, which you don't have to, but one way to think of it is as a wheel, then we have right view, right ought, or right thought, or right intention, right speech, right action. Now we're at the bottom, where, as I say, the rubber meets the road. So this wheel hits the ground. This is the low point, which is what I love about it. This is the real stuff now. Right livelihood. How are you actually living? Is what you're doing to make a living, is that of true benefit to the world? The reason I love this one so much is that if we have been mature and moving to this point, then we acknowledge how hard this is. How very, very hard this is. If it doesn't seem hard to you, then to my knowledge, there are only two possibilities for you. One is you are fully awakened. The other is you are delusional. You're deeply delusional. Everywhere between deeply delusional and fully enlightened is hard. It's a struggle because I don't know how to do it. I mean, I don't know. And you go through that for years. Should I reiterate that? I think it was eloquent, maybe the most eloquent part of the talk so far. Just, that's what it's like. You just keep trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing, and years pass. It's that process that both allows the inner transformation to happen, that makes it possible eventually to have right livelihood, but also it prevents us from doing what we work so hard to overcome here. And that is this sense of, well, you all are bad. It's those other people who have power that are causing the problems, and they're bad. That explanation, that approach to the crisis right now is one that is cleansed from our hearts by this hope, this desire, this struggle to have right livelihood. We see also then that right action is actually really hard, that right speech is really hard, that all of your thoughts and emotions be in accord with compassion and relinquishment and generosity and friendliness. That's really hard, it turns out. Really hard to hold right view, a view that's both true and beneficial. This is all really hard, and it's as if the rubber meets the road. It comes to a climax at right livelihood, where we can no longer buy the explanation, it's because you people are bad. If you all would just change, everything would be okay. That approach, that view, dies at right livelihood. Because right livelihood is humiliating, and there's a deep grieving that comes at this stage. If we go through that, and we're going to talk about going through that a lot here. This is our vow. This entire day, all these days are driving in the direction of what is your right livelihood. We're moving in that direction this whole time. If we can do that, then a completely new and unimaginable empowerment emerges. A kind of energy and power comes forth that we realize we always had, But because we were so compassionate, we didn't allow ourselves to embody it. And what I mean by that, we knew as long as I was an untrustworthy person who wouldn't even live in a right livelihood and was always saying, you other people are the problem, such a person shouldn't have this kind of power. And so I kept it from myself. I put myself in a cage to protect the world from myself because I'm so loving, because I'm such a wonderful person. I would even do that to myself because I love the world that much, that we're all like that. If we haven't experienced this surge of power, it's because of our deep compassion. But, good news, you can be that compassionate and still give yourself that amount of power by working through this process until you can live right livelihood, and then you gain what was called right effort, which means you have the power to bring forth positive states and relinquish negative states. It means then that you can bring forth right mindfulness. And of course, we strive in certain ways as we go through this struggle. It's not like you have to do everything perfectly. It isn't really in order like this. They all interact with each other. I'm just giving you one version of it. But the bringing forth of this right striving allows us to maintain right mindfulness. And while you're here, you should maintain both this right striving. You should strive to bring forth positive states and relinquish negative states. And you should bring forth right mindfulness. So that means that whatever you're doing, you are maintaining mindfulness. You're aware when you're walking that you're walking, when you're sitting that you're sitting, when you're speaking that you're speaking, when you're listening that you're listening, when you're eating that you're eating. You're constantly aware of what you're doing. This is what Daniel was talking about when he said, stay with your experience. That means, yes, walk mindfully. It also means feel mindfully. It means think mindfully. It means speak mindfully, hear mindfully. Stay with your experience without a gap. That's the challenge of right mindfulness. As you do that, then you gain the ability to enter right samadhi, which you might translate as right concentration or right meditation. And we'll do a lot of that too. For hours a day, we're going to be doing meditation. And to the extent that the previous aspects of this path empower this meditation, the meditation then brings forth true right view. True right view is no longer just an assumption. It's no longer just that you take it on because you don't know what else to do. You finally are in a position to confirm, to verify, or of course deny, disprove the absolute or the transcendent right view, which is insight, true spiritual insight. This process is comprehensive, and I know it's sort of intellectual and there's a lot of pieces to it, but I thought I should give you an overview of what we'll be doing, and know that all of it is about purifying our minds and moving through a grieving process that enables a love and a joy that is currently inaccessible to us. Know that. For all of us here, including me, all of us here are striving over the next few days to experience the love and a joy that we currently cannot, that at this moment is inaccessible. At the end of this time, we strive in order to experience that, and then we want to embody and live that. Ideally, as a community, because this sense of community is, again, essential to most spiritual traditions, certainly Buddhism. This sense of community is where the friendship that we've discussed comes to life, and in that is developed a collective intelligence in which all of our skillful and unskillful states come together and are used to participate in a new kind of collective intelligence that can interact with the collective intelligence of the human mind that's causing this crisis. Because it really isn't individuals that are causing this crisis. It's a collective human mind It's causing the various parts of this crisis, so we need a collective human mind in order to resolve it. That's the community. That's the thing that makes the systems. So we talk about perception, behavior, and systems. These systems are produced in community, collaboratively. And you could even say it's just kind of a different dimension of perception and behavior. A community has its own kind of perception. A community has its own kind of behavior. And what a community is can get bigger and bigger. So it's as if you have perception and behavior as a feedback loop, and then maybe this kind of feedback loop, and then they spiral into more and more complex forms of perception and behavior with larger and larger numbers of people that are systems, or you could say communities or collective intelligences. So we're participating in all of that here. That is what we are doing. And that is something to rejoice in. That is something to rejoice in. As I said, when I was 10, I was very angry and sad and lonely. And there's nothing that resolves that for me more, that's more heartening than this thing that we are doing here now. We are, right now, the evidence against the state of mind I had when I was 10 when I gave up on all of us. We now are that, here, now. That is what we are. Not what we believe or think or something. That's what we are being. We are being the solution, the evidence against that view. That's very encouraging. So please, give yourself permission to be confused and sad and grieve. That has to be okay. And give yourself permission to be happy and to love and to rejoice. That has to be okay. Give yourself that permission to do that as an individual, and also know that you're participating in a group. All of us here are part of it and are participating in it, whether we happen to notice that we're doing that or not. Have we finished there? Is it good timing? Is that correct? Okay, great. So it's very good to be here with you. You're not wrong. You're having an experience. It's not the wrong one. It's not the wrong one. I'm going to have that experience, and have that experience completely. The problem here is not that you need to be fixed. The issue isn't that you're wrong. I won't. I'll finish there. I won't talk more about that. I hope we have a chance to revisit that. Please trust that you're not wrong, that you do not need to be fixed. That we can have this experience. And with that naturally comes a deep love and total connection that saves the world.